A new house, new job, new friends. About a month into this exciting new beginning, after work one night, you, your boss, and a few friends head out to a local bar. Then the party moves to your boss's residence, which is where things get a bit murky and deadly. Because by sunup, one of you winds up a murder victim, while the others scurry to decide when and if they are going to speak to police. My name is M. William Phelps. I'm an investigative journalist and the true crime author of close to 50 books. I've dedicated the past 20 years of my life helping families of the missing and murdered. Join me. We're crossing the line. It's mid-June 2023. Floyd County, Prestonsburg, Kentucky. A time of the year when the heat and the humidity come in waves and there seems to be no escaping it. Prestonsburg and the surrounding county is about as rural and country as it gets in the South. A place where you stop at the post office to drop off some mail and run into 2 or 3 people you know. It is also, by the way, a mecca for country music royalty, with the Big Sandy Valley producing some of the biggest names in the industry: Loretta Lynn, Crystal Gayle, and Dwight Yoakam, just to name a few. US 23, better known as the Country Music Highway, runs straight dag-nab through Prestonsburg. 39-year-old Amber Spradlin is, for what may be the first time in her life, enjoying the benefits of being someone who never gives up, a fighter, a woman who would not allow adversity or tragedy to stop her from pursuing her dreams and goals. Amber's cousin, Dr. Debbie Hall, is a general practice physician. She grew up in town and became as close to Amber as if she was her own child.
Well, I was a senior in high school when Amber was born, and I went away to school. So I would just see her for the first 8 years when I would come home on weekends and holidays and things like that. But once I moved back home, I was around her quite a bit.
The peace and contentment Amber had worked toward in her life, however, was not all field meadows and wildflowers and Sunday dinners around the family table, laughing and joking around.
When she was born, her mother died in a very suspicious incident. Amber was about 4 years old then. And she went to live, her grandparents took her in and raised her. And then when Amber was, I think probably about 12 years old, her half-sister was killed in an automobile accident. And when Amber was about probably 16 or 18 years old, her father passed away then. So she had a lot of loss early in her life. But her grandparents, she lived with them, and they took good care of her, and they were well-traveled, and her grandfather was a master sergeant in the Army, retired military. They traveled a lot, and Amber had things that she needed and had a good life growing up. She didn't do without.
In school, Amber had a difficult time fitting in. She was bullied and wound up becoming a loner. Having endured so much tragedy in her young life, she developed several emotional issues and found herself bouncing from school to school, not entirely comfortable anywhere.
She had, some emotional problems, as any child would that loses their mother at such an early age and loses their sister. And this was at a time when it wasn't common for grandparents to be raising their grandchildren. So she had a little trouble going from school to school, and sometimes she would have little emotional outbursts where she would just get really upset and storm off. And after she would sit for a while, she'd be okay and come back and join back in with things. But she finally made it through high school. She went to an alternative school and graduated high school, and she tried to find her way to fit in after that. And she finally did graduate from the National College of Business with a lot of different certifications for billing and things like that. Before she did that, she was a volunteer in my medical office. She volunteered for 3 years. She showed up every morning at 8 a.m. and was there until 5 in the evening, uh, 4 days a week. And she did that for 3 years with no compensation at all, except a free meal here and there.
That disciplined work ethic showed the true nature of who Amber strives to become into adulthood. She hated the idea of disappointing people. As she matures, Amber calms down and is able to let go of most of her problems and rise above them. She begins to fit in, build friendships with people, and outgrow her past, essentially. Into her early 30s, Amber's grandparents, the same people who had raised her, become quite ill, and Amber is now taking care of them. Their health and their lives her number one priority. After her grandparents pass, Amber is left on her own. They'd given her a bit of money, so she purchases a small house in Prestonsburg and begins working.
She moved into a new house. She bought a downsized from the one that she had lived in, and it was her first time getting out on her own. She had a good circle of friends, some good friends. All of her life, I've only known her to have 2 boyfriends, and she had a boyfriend at that time. She was just flourishing and doing well. All her life, she just wanted to fit in and to be liked. Family was very important to her. She was at every family gathering and, holidays, meals. She made sure we were getting together.
Some bumps along the way, sure. So many deaths, absolutely. But Amber rises from it all and finds herself enjoying the life she'd worked so hard to carve out. Part of what Amber yearns for in life is what a lot of women her age dream of.
She really wanted to find someone to marry and to settle down with and to have a child was what she really wanted to do.
She'd had a few boyfriends, but nothing had ever materialized into a serious enough relationship for her to realize that ultimate dream of a family. And one of the reasons Dr. Debbie mentions is something that has saddled Amber quite a bit.
Amber had a lot of health problems, and her anxiety and some of her mental issues. She would get really upset and nervous, and I think she had a mild case of Asperger's because she couldn't read social cues, and she couldn't tell when people were joking with her. She had to stay on just a regimented schedule. If she got off track or off schedule, it really upset her. So, and she had asthma, and she had a knee injury and had to have surgery on her knee, and she walked with a limp. So she had a lot of health problems, and I don't think that she could have held down a job. And I kept trying to get her to apply for her disability, but she refused to do that because she just wanted to be like everybody else. She wanted to get out there and work and do something.
That job Amber starts is part-time. 40 hours a week would have been too much for her. The job seems to help Amber overcome her limited social skills. She is the host at a popular local restaurant just about everyone in town at some point goes to. She works the front of the house. Her boss likes her. Her co-workers accept her. And Amber has found her place, at least for the time being. The schedule has her working 4-hour shifts 3 nights per week. She'd started on May 18th, 2023. Almost a month later, June 17th, Amber is working the night shift, and she is scheduled to close the place. Just before the night ends, Amber is approached by a co-worker friend. Amber and her co-worker start talking and decide to go out after work, head further into town, about 5 miles away, and hang out at another bar. Amber says she doesn't want to stay long, maybe an hour or so. The co-owner of the restaurant where Amber works, along with his son, show up at the second bar. And they all sit together, chat it up, and seem to be having a great time. With drinks flowing, the conversation lively, Amber is enjoying herself. Who would have thought just years before that the reclusive, shy, and socially awkward Amber would be sitting here with friends and coworkers having the time of her life? Yet, as Dr. Debbie tells me, Amber wanted to be liked and be able to enjoy the things everybody else does without the restriction of being anxious and scared all the time. Before Amber and the others know it, the lights pop on inside that bar, and the announcement that it's closing time kind of surprises all of them. It's now 2 a.m. Amber's boss, who is also a prominent dentist in town, as well as the co-owner of the restaurant where Amber works, asks everyone if they'd like to continue the conversation and party at his house, about 2 miles away. Her boss, by the way, has been named publicly, but I am choosing not to name him. They all agree, including Amber. After all, since taking the job, Amber's inherent personality had evolved and come out. Outgoing, talkative, friendly, which is what made her such a great hostess at the restaurant. Here she is at 2 a.m. in the morning, heading to an after party on a night that started out where she says, "I only want to stay out for an hour." Including Amber, there are 6 people now heading over to her boss's house. By then, when they arrive and get settled, it's near 3 a.m. What happens over the course of the next several hours is something Dr. Debbie is having trouble truly understanding.
At 5:30 in the morning, there was a 911 call that was placed by, and he said that there was someone there that was really messed up and they wanted the police to come and take him out of the house. And he was falling everywhere. They couldn't do anything with him. He was bleeding profusely, and took the phone away from him and said, "This is Dr. There's nothing that's life-threatening going on here. I've got it all under control, and I'll call you back if I need you." And they hung up the phone, and no one responded to the call. They didn't even call back. They could have just called back to the house, but no one called back.
Let's just unpack this a bit. According to Dr. Debbie, someone in the house calls 911 to report that a male is hurt and bleeding. The owner of the house takes the phone from the caller and settles things by saying there's no need to send anyone. Everything is under control. The question, this after what happens next, becomes, what was this first 911 call about? What happened? Because in the coming hours, there will be a second 911 call, and, well, this second call is absolutely absent of any speculation or confusion, because someone inside that house, one of the 6, has been brutally, and I mean horrifically, murdered. I'll get into that part of this case with Dr. Debbie when I return from a break. Please subscribe to Crossing the Line wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to leave a review of the show, especially on Apple Podcasts. I'm doing this show independently now, free from any corporate or big podcasting media company involvement, which allows me to bring you more of the content you want to hear and have asked me for. This is completely our show. Reviews and subscriptions really help. You are my public relations and social media team now, and without your help, I could not do this. And that support, I must tell you, means everything. It's incredibly humbling, and I want to thank each one of you for listening. We can grow the show together, which will allow me to do even bigger things with it. If you go to crossingtheline.biz or mwilliamphelps.com, you can contact me there to suggest cases or just say hello. And look for me across all social media platforms at M. William Phelps. That's the @ symbol in my name, M. William Phelps. Be right back. I've learned from the true crime cases I have covered that whenever something feels off, and by off I mean strange, with more questions than answers, there is nefarious activity going on. As human beings, we only begin to protect ourselves when we feel there will be trouble down the road if we don't. Part of that involves either lying outright or lying by omission. When you listen to a lot of 911 calls, you get a sense when people are being completely forthcoming or holding back. With that analysis in mind, Amber Spradlin is at her boss's house for an after-work, after the bar closes party. As the sun is coming up on June 18th, 2023, somebody in the house calls 911, but then another male in the house brushes off the call by grabbing the phone, telling emergency services there is no need to send anyone. The situation is under control. Apparently, somebody had been hurt and was bleeding. But now, sometime later on that early morning, a second 911 call is placed. Incidentally, these 911 calls have not been released publicly, but Dr. Debbie went into the police station and was allowed to hear them. My analysis is based on her review of the calls. I was curious about the tone and inflection in the voices during that first call.
He was just kind of laughing a little bit. He said, "We're all drinking. We've been drinking all night. We're all of age. We're able to drink." He didn't sound, there was no, screaming or yelling or anything like that. Just normal. Nothing that would cause any alarm.
This second call comes in at about 10:30 that morning. It's from the owner of the house, Amber's boss. It's a rather terse, direct statement. Here's Dr. Debbie again.
But the next thing we know for sure is that Dr. made a call at about 10:30 that morning. So 4 hours later, and said, "There's a dead girl on my couch. I need some assistance." Flat, even-toned, emotionless.
So what we have is, there's a dead girl on my couch, a stoic, kind of business-like tone. There is more to this call, Dr. Debbie explains, speaking about her cousin, Amber Spradlin.
He says, "I think maybe somebody came in and slit her throat." And then he says, "Boy, what's her name? What's her name?" He asked the other guy that was there, "What's her name?"
So let's get this straight. Somebody came into the house and slit Amber's throat. Just randomly. Someone walks in, slits her throat, leaves. Further into this call, Dr. Debbie says, the caller yells out to someone in the room, asking what the name of the, quote, dead girl on the couch is, which is striking to me. Amber worked at the restaurant and had been out all night drinking with him and the others and had been inside his house. But he's having trouble with her name? What in the hell happened inside that house? Here's Dr. Debbie explaining what she has been told by law enforcement sources.
Okay, well, since before he placed the 911 call, we have all found out that he made 3 phone calls before he ever called 911. One of those phone calls being to the chief of police, who happens to be his friend and happens to be family members to his ex-wife and his son.
If that is true, and we have no reason to doubt that it is, there are 2 ways, in all fairness, to look at it. One is, hey, there's a darn dead girl on my couch, been murdered violently. What the hell do I do? If he's friends with the chief, he could have called for advice. Sure, not the smartest thing to do, but this is a chaotic situation. You wake up, which we assume he did, and find a young woman with her throat slit on your couch. You will have some explaining to do. You will be cast into an investigation that will not put you or your businesses into a positive light, no matter what the circumstances are surrounding this murder. The second scenario for that call to the chief could be simple. Well, I know what happened. What should I do next? Advice again, sure, but an entirely different kind of advice. I understand we live in a day and age of social media conspiracy theories running wild and dominating true crime cases. But in the real world of murder, it's highly unusual and unlikely that a police department or chief gets involved in covering up murders for friends or even fellow officers. It's just not feasible and involves too many people in order to pull it off. I'm sure it happens, but it is not something that happens as often as it does on Netflix or suggested on TikTok and other social media platforms. So I want to just say that here before moving on. As an investigative journalist, my mind goes back to that first call. There has to be some sort of a connection between that call and that second 911 call, the murder. This is not a coincidence. It would be negligent to think it was. Police arrive at the scene and begin to take a look at what happened inside this house. I am assuming they taped off the house and called in forensics and crime scene investigators. Dr. Debbie is out of town at the time this incident occurs.
I heard from 3 people before I ever got back home. I was out of town, and before I could get home, I was calling people. Can you find out what happened? Can you find out what happened? And they contacted people who were there in the house, and those people in the house said that they thought she had vomited and aspirated and died.
That tragic call, I can say from experience, because I have taken a call very similar, changes you in the moment you hear those words. Someone is telling you a loved one has been murdered, and you are a different person almost immediately. Your outlook and perspective on life changes. Your opinion of humanity becomes jaded. Your outlook on family becomes different. You are now looking at everything through the lens of someone taking the life of a person close to you. It makes you feel violated. You're confused. You feel unsafe, anxious. For Dr. Debbie, those hours before she knew Amber had been murdered were already marred in confusion and despair.
About 9:30 that morning, my cousin Missy, Amber's aunt, who kind of looked after Amber a little bit, called me, and she said, I can't find Amber anywhere. She calls me every morning at 9 a.m. And I checked the cameras. They had cameras on her house to, for protection. They would look after her that way. She said, I checked the cameras and she never came home. And I mean, Amber's just so predictable. She, you could, and as a family, we were all in touch with each other about where we're at and what we're doing. But she said Amber didn't come home. My fiance, his brother is a state policeman. So we called him and we said, we can't find Amber. Can you help us?
The disbelief that comes with this sort of news is just overwhelming.
And 10 minutes later, he called us back and he said, it looks like Amber's been murdered. I was like, no way. There's no way. That can't be so. She's hurt. We'll get home. We'll get her to the hospital and she'll be fine.
So Dr. Debbie returns from her trip and immediately shifts into family mode.
The family congregated together at Missy's house, and we just sat all day waiting to hear something. Nobody contacted us, but my future brother-in-law, because he was a state policeman, he would call and find out what was going on. The detectives are there, the coroner's there, they're taking the body out now. And finally, about midnight that night, someone from the state police called us and just said, she's dead. Her body's going to Frankfurt for an autopsy, and we'll know more later.
It seems harsh, doesn't it? One would think the police could do a better job with having a family liaison to help Amber's loved ones get through those harrowing first few days. Some departments do and some don't. In this case, I can only assume that the police needed to wait until they had some sort of information to pass along to the family. After all, there should be an intense investigation with very important questioning going on. Those who were inside the house that night should be interrogated to get everything they can out of them immediately following the murder. There is no evidence, far as I've been told, of a break-in. So that suggests that someone inside the house could have murdered Amber, and that others know who did it. It isn't until days later that the police even ask Amber's family to come in and give statements. I mean, I hate to question investigative tactics, but every public servant needs to be held accountable. So I will say that this is not something most police departments would do, unless, that is, they already have a good idea of what happened and who is responsible. They're collecting evidence, collecting statements, coming to a conclusion, and they're holding off on talking to the family so they can give them everything they have at once. I could understand that. But that's not what happens. I was curious about the autopsy and what it showed.
It took a month or a couple of months to get the results back. And I'm not supposed to talk about a lot of it, but I can say she did not have any drugs in her system, and her alcohol level was about equivalent of having had a couple of drinks. Because she wasn't really a big drinker either. Part of the injuries were stab wounds to the head and the face and the neck, and the knife blade was broken off in the carotid artery.
Let me tell you, that is a vicious, angry, extremely violent attack. Almost frenzied. Whoever killed Amber went at her with the intent to do as much harm and make her suffer as much as he or she could. Volcanic rage erupted, and Amber paid the price. Law enforcement explained to Dr. Debbie and her family that Amber definitely fought back. The wounds on her body prove as much. As more information is learned by Debbie and her family, an obvious answer seems pretty damn clear. Because nobody inside the house on that night, immediately following the murder, is willing to give police a statement. They all decide not to talk to police, which is their right, by the way. It is also the right of police to force them to come in, but that takes time, a judge, and warrants, subpoenas, that sort of thing. In the weeks and months afterward, two of the people inside the house decide to grant police interviews and sit down on what Debbie says is multiple occasions and talk about the events leading up to Amber's murder. The three refusing to give statements all live at the house. The two people who went to the house that night with Amber are the two who decide to speak to police. My first reaction to this information is, well, of course, makes sense. But then it also tells me that alliances could have been severed. Those two talking have decided that the truth needs to come out and that they want to get in front of what they know. Those others, the three living at the house, as of this recording, have yet to speak to police about what they know and what might have happened. As this investigation really gets going, the state police are called in. The local police just cannot obviously handle such a crime scene. With only two people talking about what might have happened, the answer to the murder is most likely going to be found in the evidence.
Well, the state police, they took a tremendous amount of evidence from the home. They had control of the house for 8 days with no one else in there. They took a technician from the crime lab who had worked the crime lab for 30 years. They took him in, and he helped them go over things and make sure that they got what they needed from the places that they needed. They said that it was a bloody mess, that the crime scene was a mess, and that it was very contaminated.
Dr. Debbie mentioned someone falling and bleeding in the basement, which is the incident that generated that first 911 call. So now you have a contaminated crime scene. Plus, you apparently have people in the house trying to clean it up. So where was Amber found? How? In what position?
Amber is upstairs on the couch, and she had bled out. She was on blood thinners because she'd had a blood clot before, so she had bled everywhere. She was sitting, and they said that she was slumped down, that you couldn't really tell that her throat was slit.
She was found fully clothed. So although I cannot say for certain with this limited information, it appears sexual assault or rape is not the motive. I asked Dr. Debbie how the investigation proceeded from there.
The evidence has been taken to the crime lab. We have the 47th in the nation crime lab for funding and staffing. So there's a 1.5-year backlog, but because we started making noise, they put us up ahead and started working on it. And we've just been waiting for a year for all the DNA to be processed.
There are those magic 3 letters so many people rely on today to solve cases and tell them who the perpetrator is. DNA. In terms of murder investigations, this case is in the very early stages. A year into it is not a long time. I know people want these cases buttoned up within a couple of weeks, but murder investigations don't work that way. 1, 2, 3, even 4 years into a murder investigation is not really a long time. I'm struggling with a motive in this case. What is the reason somebody wanted Amber Spradlin dead? By all accounts, she kept to herself, never meddled in people's lives, and was a quiet person. Harmless, kind, generous. What could she have done to provoke a murder? Dr. Debbie has a theory about this, which I'll get into right after this short break. If you want to learn more about me, visit mwilliamphelps.com. Whenever a vicious murder happens in a small town, and the people involved are well known, there's a town conversation, we'll call it, that takes place. Rumors, whispers fly about. People make things up. The social media community boards explode, become very active. I asked Dr. Debbie to explain to me what she began to hear.
The rumors that I have heard is that likes to torture animals. He's been seen slitting throats of puppies. I heard he was at a party and grabbed some girl's small dog and snapped its neck. He was in a fraternity and they caught him skinning cats and they kicked him out of the fraternity. I hear that he's been on antipsychotic medication all his life. Mom and Dad take him out to the bars every weekend and they all drink together.
The person she describes there, who I am choosing not to name for obvious reasons, is someone from inside the house on that night. Now, I'm not one to rely on rumor and speculation. Anybody listening to the show knows that. But Debbie has solid sources. I can tell you that much. If true, this tosses motive out the door. There is no motive other than this person could have snapped. Just recently, a lawsuit has been filed in civil court. This is generally a way to get people on the record to talk about the events and hopefully get to the bottom of what happened. Yet this lawsuit is seeking something much different.
The law firm of Dale Golden in Lexington, Kentucky, is the attorney on behalf of the estate, and my cousin or Amber's aunt, Melissa Sammons, is the executor of her estate. And the suit is against people involved with the 911 system because the Kentucky State Police had held the 911 system for, 20, 30 years since we've had it here. And in February, our county judge executive and our mayor brokered a deal to move the 911 system to the Prestonsburg Police Department. But they didn't have anybody to cover in the county from midnight till 6 a.m. And they didn't have the hardware and the software installed that they needed to save some money. They took it over in February, and then this happened in June. And they said that I went to the city police department that the morning following the murder, asking why no one answered the 911 call, and they said it's not our responsibility. We don't answer anything except in the city. We don't go out into the county and answer calls. But they didn't bother to pass it on to the sheriff's office, and they didn't bother to pass it on to the Kentucky State Police.
It's hard to believe what Debbie says, that the 911 system in that county is closed during the overnight hours. Thus, if Amber herself tried calling 911 just after being attacked, there was no one there to take the call and potentially save her life. Or if someone else in the house called to report what had happened, again, no one there to take the call. Doesn't a system in place like that kind of encourage criminals to mimic what takes place in that film, The Purge? During those hours, 911 is closed if no one is minding the phones? Holy shit. I'd be terrified of the nighttime. Right? No one to reach out to. You're on your own. As this case stands now, Debbie says they are waiting for one specific DNA test to come back from the state lab, which should give them some answers to what happened and perhaps be enough for an arrest warrant. That will get parties not talking into a position where talking would benefit them in the long run. They can still choose to invoke their right to remain silent, but there will be consequences for that afterward. An interesting piece of evidence is the fact that the CCTV cameras, security, on the property had all been removed. That says something. Hope is something I like to focus on in these unsolved cases I cover here on CTL. Where do families hang their hope when things seem hopeless?
Well, just waiting for the last of the DNA to come back, and then it will go to a grand jury. And I'm certain that the grand jury will provide indictments, and the evidence that's been shared with me that I'm not allowed to talk about. I feel certain that we're going to get the indictments and the convictions that we need.
Debbie and I then talked about the chief suspect in this case, the unnamed person. I asked Debbie what she thought about him.
I think he's a budding serial killer.
Finally, it all comes down to the victim, Amber Spradlin. This girl had just gotten everything going in her life. Things were calm. She was working. She had her own home, friends. She's cruising along smoothly. This after having all that tragedy in her life. And then, pow, she's murdered? It doesn't seem fair.
I loved Amber, and she was more than just a cousin to me. She was like my little sister or my child. And the whole only reason I'm doing this is because she deserves it. I promised her a long time ago that I wouldn't let people get by with being mean to her. The reason I have been so proactive is there are so many cases here in our little area of women missing or murdered, and nothing's been done about it.
That is going to do it for this week. I will update this case as the information becomes available. Thank you for listening. The show is growing, and it's because of my great loyal listeners. Please pass word around about the show if you feel inclined and you want to help. I greatly and gratefully appreciate it. Remember, I need your help. Please subscribe to Crossing the Line wherever you get your podcast. And don't forget, leave a review of the show, especially on Apple Podcasts, and log on to crossingtheline.biz and suggest cases or just say hi. And look for me across all social media platforms using the @ symbol and my name, M. William Phelps. Thank you for supporting this show. I am allowed to do it because of you, and that truly means more to me than I can say. Be safe, be aware. CTL is produced by M. William Phelps, LLC, written and executive produced by me, M. William Phelps. Audio mastering and mixing by Matt Russell. Original music written and performed by Thomas Mooney, Tom Phelps, and Matt Russell.